The rain fell in sheets, slashing against the window like the relentless tick of a clock. Inside the dimly lit apartment, Alex Turner sat hunched over his desk, the glow of the computer screen casting an eerie pallor over his face. The hum of the streetlights below barely penetrated the thick walls of the building, but the storm outside was another matter. Its fury seemed to match the turmoil brewing in his mind. Alex wasn't sure when it had all started, the strange feeling of being watched, the whispers that would flicker just beyond the range of his hearing, the sudden sense of dread that gnawed at him like an insidious force. But it had been escalating for weeks now. And tonight, it felt worse. He glanced over his shoulder again, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. The apartment was empty, just as it had been for the past several months. His girlfriend, Julia, had left 2 weeks ago, and while he hadn't yet gotten used to the silence, it was something he could tolerate. He was a writer, after all, and solitude was part of the job. But this was different. Alex's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he typed the last line of his article, though his thoughts were miles away. He wasn't just struggling with his latest piece of writing, he was struggling with himself. Then, his phone buzzed on the desk. He almost ignored it. The number was unknown, but that wasn't unusual. Spam calls were a constant annoyance. But something made him pick up. Maybe it was the unsettling tension in the air, or maybe it was a feeling, something deep inside him telling him to answer. He swiped the screen. Hello? A breath, soft, labored, barely audible. It sent a cold chill down his spine. Who is this? Alex asked, his voice tight with sudden unease. The voice on the other end was barely a whisper. You're being watched. The line went dead. Alex's heart raced in his chest. He stared at the phone in disbelief. His fingers shook as he set it back down on the desk. He glanced around the room, but nothing seemed out of place. There was no one there, no one he could see. Still, the words echoed in his mind, bouncing off the walls like a sinister melody. You're being watched. He began pacing the room, his thoughts scrambling. He should call the police, but the fear of sounding paranoid, of coming off as someone who was losing grip on reality, held him back. After all, who would believe him? A writer, alone in his apartment, receiving a strange call. It was absurd. But what if it wasn't? The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. He couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was somehow connected to the sense of dread that had settled in his gut. He had been getting these strange, cryptic messages for weeks now. At first, they were just texts, garbled strings of words that made no sense. Then came the emails, filled with disjointed sentences, random numbers, and occasional symbols that seemed to form a pattern if he looked hard enough. But the message was always clear: someone, or something, was watching him. His mind flashed back to the night Julia left. She'd packed her things quickly, barely speaking a word. She didn't believe him when he told her about the calls, the strange presence, the feeling of being followed. She said he was just stressed, that it was his imagination running wild. And maybe, for a while, Alex had believed her. But not anymore. He opened the door to the apartment and stepped into the hallway. The building was old, its narrow corridors steeped in shadows. The flickering overhead lights cast eerie silhouettes along the walls. Alex wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something in the pit of his stomach told him to keep moving. As he passed the first few apartments, he slowed, straining his ears. Nothing. Just the creak of the building settling, the faint sound of the wind outside. He reached the stairwell and paused. His eyes darted around the small hallway. There was no one there. Still, the sense of being watched wouldn't go away. He took the stairs down, each step echoing in the stillness. As he reached the lobby, the door to the building entrance swung open with a groan, and a gust of cold air rushed in. A figure stood in the doorway. Alex froze, his heart thundering in his chest. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, but he could see enough to know it wasn't someone he recognized. It was a man, Or at least, that's what the shape suggested. Before Alex could move, the figure stepped forward, his face barely visible under the hood. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The tension in the air was thick with something unspeakable. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small object. It glinted in the dim light, a camera lens, sleek and professional, the kind used by private investigators or journalists. A chill ran down Alex's spine. He knew what was happening. The man snapped a picture. "Who are you?" Alex demanded, his voice shaky. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Alex standing there, staring after him. The door swung shut behind him with a muffled thud, and Alex was left with the sound of his own breathing, ragged and uneven. Alex's mind raced as he stood there in the lobby, the storm pounding against the windows outside. Who was that? Why had he taken a picture? And how had he known about Alex's fear? The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, and the realization struck with horrifying clarity. It wasn't just his imagination. Someone was truly out there. Someone had been watching him for far longer than he'd known. The building was silent again, too silent. Alex turned on his heel, rushing back up the stairs to his apartment. He slammed the door behind him and locked it. Sweat slicked his palms, his pulse pounding in his ears. He staggered to the window, pulling back the blinds. Nothing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting outside, just out of sight, watching. He needed to get out, needed to leave, to disappear. But there was nowhere to go. No place safe enough. His phone buzzed again. This time, the message was clear. "You can't escape. We're already inside." Alex's blood ran cold as his eyes darted around the apartment. The shadows seemed to grow longer, more threatening. The room closed in on him, and for a moment, it felt as though the walls were pressing inward, suffocating him. Then he heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the other side of the door. Knock. 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 A chill raced down his spine as he approached the door slowly, the ominous noise growing louder with each step. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob, every instinct screaming at him not to open it. But he had to know. He turned the knob. The door swung open, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he scanned the darkness. Nothing. A sudden movement caught his eye, a shadow, just a flicker, something barely visible at the far end of the hall. And then, nothing. His phone buzzed again. "It's over. You've already been found." His heart raced. He slammed the door shut and bolted the lock, collapsing against the wood. Sweat streamed down his face as the realization dawned on him. Whoever had been watching him was already inside. The silent threat had been with him all along. And now, it was only a matter of time before it came for him. If you enjoyed the story, make sure you smash that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications to help the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.